Produced by Podcast Architects.
Welcome back to The Path Forward. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Rick Fernandez, and I have a very special guest today, Chief Delivery Officer from Anser Advisory, Adam Shaw. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So I want to dive right in because you have a very interesting story, and you and I got to spend some time the last couple of days, and I've been kind of hounding on you with the questions. Tell me a little bit about your career path and your experiences.
Well, I guess it's easiest to work in reverse chronology. So here we are sitting in Austin, Texas. Unfortunately for our Texas listeners, I am one of the people that moved here during COVID, but now call it home. As you can tell, I probably should clarify the accent for those who aren't able to see that I am, I don't know what I'm saying.
It's all right. New York, I was going to guess New York.
Yeah, I mean, so Austin, Texas today, right back at the start, born in Aberdeen, Scotland, a little place that no one ever travels to when they say they've been to Scotland. So I kind of liken it to Houston because it's an oil town.
Really?
And when I was growing up, there was a bunch of people that kind of left school, kind of out of the blue, and where did they go? Everyone went to Houston.
Really?
So there's this inextricable link in my history between where I grew up, a dark, dingy city of 200,000 people in Scotland, and where I've somehow ended up proximate to Houston. So all of the oil company names that people throw out there, like you're supposed to know who they are and what they do, that's been my life growing up. But, you know, that small town story, familiar to a lot of people. When I graduated college, the first thing I did was get out as quickly as I could. And I've kind of been somewhat of a nomad and a global citizen since my early 20s, and spent the formative part of my professional career actually in Australia. Because I moved there during the financial crisis because, again, I basically said, I'm getting anywhere outside of Europe that isn't in meltdown, and Adelaide, Australia happened to be the place where there was a job opening, and I got on a plane with 2 bags and went on an adventure.
So let me ask, your family, when you're kind of breaking the news, are they along the whole process as you're thinking about this, or is it like you spring it on them like, hey guys, I got to make a move, and how did that all go down?
Well, this might be going too deep too quickly, but the reality is my family have never understood my decision making. My father never understood why I wanted to go to college and not just be earning money straight out the gate. You know, he's a guy in the trades, so spending 4 years hoping that you're going to get paid more money at the back end of it didn't make sense to him. But that's also my character. So if someone tells me I shouldn't do something, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And so when it came naturally to graduating college and moving to Glasgow at the time was the first city I landed in, again, it was, why would you want to do that? Then when Australia came up, it's like, why the heck would you want to do that? And in reality, I just had, immature, reckless abandon, but it worked in my favor because my real fear at the time was circumstance are going to play against me. And my biggest fear throughout my whole professional life has been, I'm not scared of work. I know I can be capable of something, and the worst thing I'd have to experience is regret that I didn't materialize my own potential. And so making these kind of leaps of faith have become really natural and instinctive now. It's like building a muscle. The whole thing of picking up and moving now just feels like a completely normal thing, whereas to some people that would kind of throw them sideways to think that they're leaving family, they're leaving everything they know. In fact, I think I end up getting a bit of an itch and have to run away from things becoming too familiar.
So I'm going to guess in your early 20s when you make the move to Australia. Yeah. When did it become real? Like, did it hit you like, I just moved to another country with a fresh start, and there's a little bit of excitement, but a little bit of fear? Do you remember like a time where was it when you landed? Was it, the first day at work? How did that sensation go?
I would say that the first stark challenge was that I had arrived, I did know one person that I'd done a study exchange with in Copenhagen, Denmark, 5 years prior to that. And so that was my one friend in the whole continent of Australia. And I used him for some insight on what to do, but literally the most simple thing of finding a place to rent. I didn't understand the social construct in the city that I moved to, which was you can have the best application in the world, you can have the security deposit. If you're not there meeting the agent and making the agent feel good that they trust you, you're not getting the place.
Really?
And that was a completely kind of new subcultural thing to me, because as far as I was concerned, I'm a professional guy.
Right.
I'm good for the money. I can prove my income, but it wasn't enough. And that was kind of one of the very first realizations I had, that we speak English in these two countries, but culturally they're very different in some of the constraints, some of the kind of societal structures. And it's only over time you realize just how different it is. Whereas if I went to another country that spoke a different language, I would assume that there's deep cultural differences and that I would have to kind of go on that learning curve.
So Australia, and then from Australia to where?
Well, even within Australia, I'd moved to Adelaide, which is in South Australia. It's a population of about 1.2 million for the whole of the state. And I was there for kind of 3-4 years. And then even in that time frame, I kind of ascended pretty quickly through the ranks in the firm I was in, frankly, just from taking responsibility and sticking my hand up and be willing to take on more. And through that process, I kind of realized it was going so fast, I was running out of runway on where I was going to go in a market that small.
Right.
And so I started to turn my gaze to Melbourne, which is a far bigger metropolitan area. And again, one of the subcultural challenges in Australia is, the attitude is that Adelaide is a small country town relative to the big cities, and folks who get their professional experience in the small country town can't transition to the big city.
Really?
Now, as an immigrant, I'm kind of, I didn't know anything about Australia until I landed with my 2 suitcases. So I've done this. Why not go try conquer the bigger city environment? So I pursued an opportunity. I think one of the important points as I share this story, and I think about who I was at that point in time in my career, is data points become very important. So I was in this small country town, and I, to everyone else's surprise, landed a job in Melbourne that was paying me $50K more. So it was small town guy coming to the big city, but they were also paying me a hell of a lot more.
Right.
And obviously, I didn't really sweat the cost of living differences at the time. It was just like, this is the opportunity. The numbers stacked the right way, I'm gone. As life tends to, there was a little bit of a curveball thrown in at that time, which was kind of 3 weeks before I was due to move from Adelaide to Melbourne, I met my now wife.
We can edit out that you just called your wife a curveball there, but that's
Well, the curveball was really, I met her and I'd spent the whole time living in Adelaide kind of complaining about single life because there wasn't that big a pool. And then I met my wife when I'd already accepted the job to move. And kind of the one probably bravest call I've ever made in my life was to actually ask her to come on the 10-hour drive from Adelaide to Melbourne as I moved across the country to really kind of do this baptism of fire of, if we're going to work and if we're going to try long distance, we should be able to survive a 10-hour car ride together. So as I say, she's now my wife and the rest is history, so it worked out. But from that transition, that again built upon the muscle that had been developed around picking up, setting up in a new market, frankly being kind of belligerent to other people's fears that they tend to project when they, you can see it in someone's face when you share something you're doing and they're like, what about this? And what about that? And it's like, it's all projection because they're trying to understand how they would process similar change. And, you know, obviously in retrospect, you can start to see a thread of rapid adaptation, high degree of change, and fast forwarding to where I am now, I really am appreciating the fact that my career path has been kind of volatile in the sense that it's been very aggressive, steep curve, but that's given me so much capacity and perspective on the challenge I'm now charged with managing. And it just, you know, I've always kind of been told that I was mature beyond my years. I think the quality of the diversity of experiences I've had have really added to that. And now I find it, you know, as someone who's worked in different countries, in different cities, with different mixes of people, I had to learn to find a way to relate to people who I was inherently different from. And I think that's a skill that some people don't get the chance to hone.
Absolutely, I would agree.
And so as a father now of 3 kids, one of our biggest fears of parenting is that my kids don't want to spread their wings far enough.
Right.
So we obviously don't want to overcorrect generation by generation, but my fear with my wife is that we create such a comfortable environment in our family that they don't want to leave and they don't want to go do the international kind of experience.
Yeah, the lack of adversity and necessity to do things. Kind of, I get it. My 3 kids, and we wonder, you know, they're not having to go through some of the same trials. Am I really doing what's best for them? Because these trials are going to hit them at some point in their life. I do want to jump into your title because it is a unique title, Chief Delivery Officer. So can you break that down? What does that mean?
Okay, so the title I was not part of creating. So I'll try to do it justice and not speculate on the original thought patterns. But what it means to me is that, you know, I'm part of the C-suite. So my job is to be part of a very highly connected senior executive team that are charged with the health of the business. And within the delivery officer role, separate to the financial officer and separate to the CEO, the delivery officer is really the connectivity between the CEO's vision and the actual outcomes for clients in terms of delivering our services, but also importantly, creating the new opportunities and the actual overall running of the business in terms of hitting our performance. So it kind of sits in between the financial function, the operational delivery, and really the day-to-day leadership of our teams and our staff who are there to do a great job contributing to the overall vision in the company. So in other models in tech and otherwise, I think there's an equivalency to Chief Revenue Officer.
Okay.
But it's Revenue Officer plus Operating Officer plus,
Right.
you know, which is the nature of being in the consulting business. We tend to be more generalists and expanded roles so that we can really provide not just the support to that function within the business. In our industry, it's important that the people who have those roles also have the understanding of the actual work we do. And so the authenticity of leadership in consulting is really predicated on how do you lead a team without understanding what work they have to perform.
Right.
And I personally think that's a similar concept to, you know, how do you run a district without having been an educator?
Right.
But clearly there's tipping points on scale and complexity of what those roles command from an individual.
So we've talked about this the last couple of days, and you've asked some very good questions, reflective questions to help me capture Anser Advisory. So if you were to give the elevator speech of this is who we are, this is what we stand for, these are the clients that we serve, can you give me a little bit into that?
Yeah, I mean, we are a business now of 800 people. And so we clearly, with 800 folks working every day, we do a range of different things. And so one of the things that I like to ground in my description of Anser is more about, not who are we today, but who are we looking to be long term and into the future, and what does our strategy look like. Our goal at the very heart of it is to create an environment for people to have a career path, be enriched in their careers, and add value to clients. Now, how do we do that? Whether it's in transportation, K-12, water and sewer, energy, the common thread within everything that we do is that we have very strong individual talent working in an environment where they can collaborate not just with our own internal staff, but also with other folks in industry and our clients to create a successful pathway from an objective, goal, or mission to an actual outcome. Now, what that actually translates to is project management. It translates to management consulting. But we try to take an approach that differentiates our firm by really being focused on what is the vision and mission of the organization that we're serving, and what are they trying to achieve as an outcome, rather than predicating our service on a more transactional basis of, you have a project, we'll deliver it on time, on budget,
Right.
and then we'll disappear again. So we're really looking to become a foundational or support function for organizations where we can add value to their mission.
So your career path, you've had some unique experiences. How's that translated and helped shape your leadership? Because you just said 800 employees. That's a lot of folks, and I'm keep learning that everybody has a very unique skill set, and we work across the continuum. So how do you utilize your personal experiences, your ability to adapt and move? How does that shape how you lead?
Well, it comes in two directions. So there's the work that I do that connects directly with clients. Then there's the work I do to lead staff in performing their work in support of clients. So when I'm directly dealing with clients, I think what I really bring to bear is this understanding that the technical work is very rarely the challenge. The predominant barriers and challenges that projects or organizations or objectives face is the human aspect.
Yes.
And it's, in many cases, what can be considered, there's conflict in a given organization. In many cases, when you dig deeper, it's not actually conflict, it's miscommunication. And so a lot of my technical work working with clients has really been to help become a form of translator between the various positions that they might have on a given initiative, and really help find a common ground of understanding. Because as consultants in our industry, we can tend to be poor at making complex things simple.
Right.
And yet that's almost the number one goal every time I'm
Right.
sitting with a client.
Make it easier.
Let's make this easier. Let's make the information accessible. And let's aim to, even though we will undertake the work, let's make sure that people understand what the inputs, what the assumptions, what the dependencies are on the work that we're doing. As I deal with the team, there's a similar, we have our own challenges. People bring to work, whether they've skipped breakfast affects how they perform in a day. Whether they've had a fight with their partner affects their mood and therefore how they approach the day. And so I tend to always want to bring things back to the technical work is typically not the challenge, because we've got a bunch of smart people who know what they're doing. A lot of the management responsibility is about helping people reframe a problem or understand the position that someone else might be coming from or the perspective. Yeah. And so we're brokering the human connection both in the technical field of getting projects and assignments done, but also just in successful team leadership and coaching. And my perspective on that is my pathway and my career has really helped me get such a broad diversity of understanding of different perspectives that, I think I'm a pretty good read of people, and I can pick up quite quickly where someone might be coming from, and that allows me to, in many cases, shortcut the long explanation to just say, it seems like you're struggling with this.
Yeah.
Let's move through it.
You know where the pain points are quicker than some others. That's a great point. I do want to ask you, since the crux of what we discuss is innovation in education specifically, I have been reading as much as I possibly can since you shared this P3 model, a funding model, but I want you to tell us what it is and how would a district use it, and just give us a little bit of insight of some of the things you've done with P3.
Sure. So P3 stands for Public-Private Partnership, and I've been working in shaping and transacting P3s for the past 15 years. So in the UK, in Australia, in the US, and in Canada. It's fair to say that P3 is thrown around fairly liberally, and it has become somewhat of a hot topic in our industry, particularly in the US over the past decade. What it really boils down to is it's a delivery method.
Okay.
Now, the question that many people wrestle with is, okay, it's a delivery method, but isn't it financing? So the way I try and bring it back to basics for folks is, in many cases, people start to look towards P3 because there is a preconceived notion that it's a way to get someone else to finance projects that you don't otherwise have the funding for.
Okay.
That would make it a funding mechanism. It's not that in and of itself.
Okay.
So from a school district standpoint, where it's relevant is where there is an objective that the district wants to achieve, where you can assess the district's ability to self-perform versus bringing in outside help, which happens in a variety of different ways. And in many cases, it's landed in the K-12 space where there's been a recognition that the district is not the best placed group to manage the physical assets, the real estate, the buildings, the maintenance, and that the private sector may be in a position to do a better job that is more cost effective.
Right.
And certainly more efficient. So the way that we see the market going for K-12 is that P3 could be a very powerful tool for districts who have a significant backlog of maintenance or a whole host of assets that are coming to the end of their life, and they have a real stepped challenge to modernize their facilities.
Okay.
And what that would look like is effectively for a district to identify what it would cost them to build new, then look at the ongoing operations and maintenance cost of doing that, and effectively casting that out over a typically 25 to 35 years.
Okay.
Within that, they would have the cost to raise the bonds and the debt service, and we'd effectively do a side-by-side comparison. So we'd say, here's the total cost over 30 years for the district to do it, and we would develop an assessment of, here's what it would cost the private sector to undertake the design, the building, the financing, the operating and the maintaining over 30 years, and dependent on the individual deals, we're effectively trying to see where is there a net value for money benefit from taking that P3 approach. It is not a free source of money. It does involve debt, and in many cases, to optimize the structuring of that type of deal, districts would still be committing some capital.
Right.
However, this model would allow them to potentially spread capital over a larger number of initiatives because they're not having to come up with 100% of the cost out of that bond issuance.
So as a former superintendent, my fears would be, okay, if it's a partnership, how much of it do I get to control, right, for my kids and my teachers? Do we get total autonomy, like if a teacher needs to go work on a Saturday, or we're having athletic events, or is the building going to be used for all these other different things that I'm not aware of? How does that kind of structure work between private and a public school district?
Yeah, very common questions. One of the key things that underpins this model is that really what you're creating is a concession agreement. So it's an agreement to make improvements upon your land that remains your land.
Okay.
And they're effectively constructing these facilities for your use. Now, the way that the performance element of the contract works is that the development team that provides the P3 are under a performance regime. So they're held accountable to a very detailed, very long, almost algorithmic formula.
Wow, okay.
That basically calculates, are the facilities available? And even if they are available, are they performing to a prescribed level? Now, every single square inch in the school would have effectively a criticality factor attached to it. So let's say the teacher's lounge is unavailable. Mm-hmm. That may have a lower grade performance criteria than an instructional space where, you know, having kids not able to be instructed is a bigger deal. The reality is that the structure really forces the developer to prove that they're continuing to provide the facilities available for your use to a prescribed level. And so the district really would get effective guarantee that if the facilities are there and they're available for your use, then that's great. If they're not, then you start to deduct the payments due to the developer. And so there's a real skin in the game component that frankly goes a whole level beyond best endeavors of the district staff, who are going to do their best with what they've got. Ultimately, you're not going to hold an individual staff member accountable for, you know, a burst pipe, meaning that you've got all this expense and all this operational issues. You can to the developer because they've designed it, they've built it, they're maintaining it, and so their obligation is to give you free, unfettered access to do the delivery of the mission of the district in that space.
So they assume all of the risk behind the operation, the upkeep, and the quality over the time of the whatever the agreement would be.
Yeah.
So
and importantly, they also bake into this deal that, you know, at the end of year 7, that carpet gets ripped up and new carpet gets laid down.
And that's mutually kind of agreed upon of when the lifespan of certain components would.
But it's all planned out and funded in advance, and that's where our work with higher ed institutions, you know, most administrators' minds blow at that. Mm-hmm. They think, well, I struggle, I get the capital together, I get a building improved, then I deal with the change orders because it doesn't cost what I originally approved. And then, you know, I throw it to another side of the house, and every time we go up for funding approval for maintenance work, we never get the amount we ask for.
Right.
And so right from the get-go with a brand new building, and this applies to districts too, you can be starting behind the 8 ball on maintenance and life cycle renewal from day one. This eliminates that risk because you're pre-funding it, and you're also retaining the ability to flex that pre-funded maintenance in ways that have to be factored into the operational consistency of running the school.
So if a district were to ask, okay, there's 15 years of a kind of a history or a track record, could you show me the side-by-side data and the cost and how that's played out from the 15-year history?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of P3 deals around the world, a number in Australia and the UK that did some pretty extensive school building programs, and that would tend to look like a bundle, because an individual school is not likely to be of scale enough to defray the costs of bringing in a developer and funding a project. So the deals that I've been involved in have kind of been 5 schools, 5 to 8 schools in one tranche. So you'd have 4 elementary, 2 middle, and 2 high schools, as an example. The economies of scale that can be achieved by the developer in knowing that they have to build all of these facilities in a fixed schedule allows them to look not only at what materials are we specifying, what's going to be the best cost-benefit analysis over 30 years, not just what's the lowest cost for me because I'm a GC. And then they're also able to look at things like the operational efficiency of how the building operates and really look at the balance between, if we take physical security as an example, dependent on how you design the hardscape outside, dependent on how you design the administration reception space, how you design entry points, you can be flexing the design of the buildings to actually make year-over-year personnel savings that over a 30-year period significantly save money.
Yes.
And so they're really engaged in optimizing the total cost of ownership of the building, which includes the first cost of building it, the ongoing cost of operating it, the cost of staffing it, and the maintenance and the life cycle. And so there's a real, when we talk about innovation, you want to get all the best ideas on the table. You ask the private sector to solve for the next 30 years. And that's where they can, instead of this typical binary argument that people have about trying to hit a budget and get things down for that first time cost, you're actually engendering the right behavior that says, okay, this building might cost $5 million more in capital cost, but it's actually going to save us 10 in the total cost over 30 years. And you're buying that saving day one, not just hoping that it's going to materialize that way.
That's an interesting way. Yeah, I can't think of a time that we've looked at it, or I've looked at it, or been in conversations that we've looked at it that way, right? Because we're always so focused on, all right, let's put out the fire, how do we solve our spacing issues, or how do we solve our growth, or sometimes how do we solve our lack of usage for certain facilities. Is it possible for school districts to be able to do this in a way that, how do you have a discussion with your community and your school board? Because again, one of the fears I would have as a superintendent is, okay, when people hear private and you bring that into K-12 in a public school, there's always like, well, what are they getting out of it? Or how do you go about the conversation? What are some of the tips you would say?
Well, I'll take the question in 2 parts. The first is private. It should be no surprise to people that, the GCs that build the schools aren't nonprofits.
Yeah, no kidding.
The architects that design the schools aren't nonprofits. So there's a bunch of private activity that supports the construction of facilities. What we're really, and let me say even furthermore, the finance, even though it's conduited through a public process, the people who are providing the investment to create the demand for the bond are private.
Yeah, they're not doing it for free.
So the most important part here is this is about physical assets being delivered by people who do it every day of the year as their profession. And looking at who best to manage the process of developing a new facility, it's putting that investment in the right place with the people who know how to optimize it best. Now, the fear would be, who are we letting inside the school gate to tell us what to do? Well, the fact is that whilst in some international models, there are privatized operations. So in Australia, it has a public health system like Canada. So public hospital delivered as a P3 actually included privatized operational services like the orderlies that push gurneys around the hospital as part of a private contract. I haven't seen that in any way, shape, or form in K-12 because we're not going to have P3 teachers in the classroom. The important message for stakeholders, and I immediately go to parents, is we have, as a district, a whole bunch of stuff we have to manage with constrained resources, and that takes us away from having an absolute laser focus on the outcomes of our client, which is the students.
Yes.
And so for many folks, whether it's a school or it's a new civic center or it's a convention center or a courthouse, the common theme is we don't need to be in the business of owning and operating and managing our facilities. We just need the facilities to be available for us to use.
Right.
And having that clarity on mission and effectively removing a lot of the administrative noise from what are challenges that district leadership have to deal with, it's kind of just smart business.
Yeah.
So let's focus on the thing that drives most value, which is student outcomes.
Right.
And let's look at how we more smartly deal with the necessary evils of running a district.
Right.
So let's do it in the smartest way possible, the most cost-effective way possible. But it's a challenge because there's decades and decades of inbuilt perspective and behaviors on what is the norm.
Right.
And so it really is a challenge for folks to say, there has to be a better way. That's where most of these conversations start, is frankly, the calls I get about P3 are normally from an administrator or a leader in the public sector saying, I am sick and tired of doing this dumb shit. There has to be a better way.
Yeah, I mean, that's, a lot of times that's what the call is for. It's like, I can't do this anymore. Somebody needs to help me and us figure this out. And that is absolutely accurate. I've made that call many times, like, how do we do this better? Like, this isn't making sense. If we say the mission is this, why are we banging our head against the wall with this component of it?